welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. We are setting the standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and the consequences for those choices. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for.
Well, I think the 3.4% is really a false number. Based on a lot of conversations with a lot of people that do this, I think the number is way under 1%.
So to fact check, the World Health Organization says the coronavirus death rate is 3.4%.
President Trump lies that the World Health Organization is wrong.
The number is 3.4%. 3.4% is what it's being reported around the world.
Making it deadlier. So much death.
The death rate.
The percentage is 3.4%. And no hunch from the president can change that.
Trump lied about the most recent World Health Organization estimate that the global death rate of coronavirus is 3.4%.
The 3.4% death rate was wrong, and WHO data later updated it to
a fraction of 1%.
Let's go back into history.
Trump has a hunch that the death rate is lower than 1%.
Way under 1%.
Way under 1%. Will someone put a mozzarella stick in his stupid hole?
Trump lied to viewers about the mortality rate.
Way under 1%.
False information.
He's spreading disinformation.
Misinformation and dangerous disinformation.
If you're president of the United States, you have the world's greatest scientists at your disposal. You listen to them.
Leading scientists, including Dr. Fauci, wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine that the death rate could be considerably less than 1%.
The money started pouring in. Remember this, Chris. It wasn't pouring in for Harris. It was pouring in against Trump. Everybody that was voting and supporting Harris was really voting against Trump. And everybody that was voting for Trump was voting for Trump. So she had all this money coming in. She had all these consultants. And if you don't run the ads, you don't get paid for the buy. They were running ads in Florida, where I live, nonstop. And I'm like, why? I mean, are they running them in Alabama and Idaho too? And I'll tell you why. If you don't run the ads, the buyer doesn't get paid. A $900,000 to put her face on the Sphere in Las Vegas. In the Sphere, the ego, the crazy, the commissions. I was at the White House for a dinner Friday night, talking to a lot of people. And I'm telling you, man, there's a lot of whispering. There's a lot of names about who got paid this, who got paid that. And a lot of people got rich on the back of donors trying to stop Trump. And I think this disqualifies her forever.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. I hope you're enjoying your Thanksgiving weekend. Those couple of clips actually were from the Dan Bongino show this past week, and I always like, again, how these things present themselves. When I've decided Monday, I was thinking about what I wanted this podcast to be, and then, you just kind of find things, or they find me, I should say, which is really kind of cool. But the idea of saturation to maturation, the maturation being that process of becoming or being made mature. If you type in maturation, you'll see that these are the definitions that come up, and they're very apropos, I would say. Changes that occur naturally over time in research participants, it says, which may influence study results. The process of becoming completely developed mentally or emotionally or physically grown. And the thing about the saturation that I want to talk about is that a given experience, depending on the individual, will help move a person to a point where they've had enough. And if you think about it, similar to like eating a meal, you're hungry, you're starving, it's like can't wait to sit down and eat, much like this week perhaps with Thanksgiving. And when you've reached a point of saturation where you've had enough food, you push yourself away from the table. Now, those times that you don't push yourself away from the table and you keep eating past that point of saturation, how does that feel? Usually not great, right? It becomes discomfort. It becomes, difficult to think clearly. Everybody's kind of different in how they process it, but definitely until you reach a point where saturation becomes kind of an indicator to you of enough. Now I need to self-correct. The saturation point can actually help move you to a place of being done with something. So I don't necessarily see it as, of course, I don't see any of it as good or bad, right or wrong. I see it as an opportunity to move past something. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure that I say, because I think this is kind of an important point, at least it has been for me, I should say, only one's own can correct one's own. Only one's own can correct one's own. And it is one's own that must do the correction. So I've talked about this previously a couple of different times when I talk about, the Black community, the Hispanic community, the gay community, whatever. The women's movement, all of these things where they have grouped themselves, they diversified themselves, but really what they've done is they've just taken their group and moved them over to this corner or over to that corner. And what I mean by this is that when people within their own community start to realize that they've reached saturation and something doesn't work anymore, or that they have had their awakening and they see clearly the reality that's going on, the only way that they are going to maturate, here we go, the only way they're going to do that, becoming completely developed mentally and emotionally, is by owning it. So, the Black community wants to move forward. They have to own what's going on already in their community. The women's movement, they want to move past certain things. They have to own what's already going on with them. The gay community, same thing. And, anyone in a political party, if they want to mature into something, if they want to find their standard of responsibility and accountability, they must take ownership. They must take ownership of responsibility, and they must have accountability of consequences, whereby if there are consequences and there's a way for that to have a resolution, then that's how it works. But by ignoring it, by blaming, and you still see a lot of that going on right now within, the political aspects of it, but you can also see it in the various diversity groups where they're just not owning their stuff. Now, I've seen it more this year than I have in previous years, where groups are, through social media, they are taking ownership of what has gone on in the past with their particular factions, and they're moving past it. And they're realizing that the consequences of accountability have been that, they've had to struggle and they've had a lot of challenges, but they need not, it's unnecessary suffering, right? Because you need only to acknowledge it, to take ownership of it, and then what is the action that you're going to take in order to move past it? Because without any action, then there are no consequences, which means there is no accountability. So an action must be taken. It's just the law of nature, right? So this idea of only one's own can correct one's own is going to be super important as we move forward. Look how important it was for Elon and Joe Rogan and JFK Jr. and all of these people that they were calling out the behaviors. Some of the most important changes and shifts have been through the eyes of Bill Maher on his show. I don't remember what the name of the show is, but you see it all the time where even he was calling out people on his show saying, listen, you guys suck. You were sitting there browbeating people, and you're making fun of people, and you're being he used a word, I can't think of what it is now off the top of my head, but, denigrating people basically. And he's like, they're not into that. They don't want to hear that. They're tired of hearing that. And it was a great moment because that means that there is a maturity, there's a maturation that is happening. And it has to be people from the group. It can't just be their opposition, the opposition to whatever the other communities are, the opposition to the political party. It can't be that. It has to be people from within their own group. One's own corrects one's own. And that's how that is going to happen. The saturation is in understanding that a given experience, of course, depending on the individual, that they will have had enough of it. Whenever I've been in relationships, well, not even dating, I should say, over the last 10, 20 years maybe, my thing has always been to saturate. With a job, whenever I've been in jobs, is to saturate, is to go in and just allow myself to experience it and to saturate with it. Because if it's moving in the direction I want, if it's moving towards something, then great, I'm there. And if it's moving away from something, great, I'm there too. Then I know when to move out of a certain situation. When I was a counselor years ago, I would always encourage people in relationships to do that, to spend more time with somebody. If you're having family issues, spend more time with them, saturate yourself so you can get to a point where enough, I'm done. And it will move you to action. It'll move you to action and to some sort of a resolution. Now, what's interesting is some people, they have a very healthy approach and they have enough comprehension that they don't need saturation. And they will take their cues from observation, right? So we've talked about where emotions are cues for us to be able to pay attention. Oh, okay, got it, okay. Not living in it, but just acknowledging it. What's so great about that is that a person can be very efficient in their life when they are taking their cues from their observation. Saturation, if you think about it, is really needed when there's a blind spot to be dealt with and people aren't an individual, a group is not paying attention to the blind spots. And, some people will see others as, wow, they live a blessed life. And others seem cursed, and that everything bad is always happening to those people. But what they're not understanding is those individuals, those groups are not having self-assessment and they're not having self-correction. And if they are ignoring the signals that are helping move them, if they're ignoring the saturation and the signals that are moving them to self-correction, then yeah, it will look like, gee, all they ever do is seem to make bad decisions. Well, it's because they're not paying attention. I mean, to be honest, that's really what it's all about. People that seem to have a blessed life are people that are making good choices for themselves. They're paying attention to the cues from their observation, and they're moving toward things and away from things appropriately for themselves. They make that decision. One of the other things I want to bring up as I wrap this up is that in terms of saturation, looking at your media and your politicians, your political landscape, because what's so great right now is that with X and with True Social and some others, with Rumble, that we really did reach a point of saturation, and we're moving, I should say, towards maturation because we're developing. And Elon made the observation, right? One's own can only correct one's own. He made the observation of the fact that we are now the media. And he is correct. And the gentleman from Axios that was having a meltdown is incorrect. He is not paying attention. He's not getting his cues from observation. And he's going to find himself more and more making the wrong decisions. And when I say making the wrong decisions, incorrect decisions that are not in alignment with accountability and responsibility, because that is a natural law, correct? We talked about that last week, that it is a natural law of accountability, that it will always happen no matter what. And you can either observe it and act within it, or you can ignore it and let it continue to, create, or wreak havoc and chaos in your life because you don't want to manage something. You want to just look past the blind spot. But when I started thinking about doing this podcast, I was thinking, look at all the things over the years where the media has lied to us. And we find out more and more what those lies were. Well, then my question to you is, how much do you need to do before you've said enough? How much do you need to see before you see that there's been enough lies going on with the media, with your politicians, that you're done with them? How much saturation do you have to get to before you are moved to do something different? I started typing out a bunch of things that I thought it was, and this is just a small sampling of it, but the JFK assassination back in the 60s, the Pentagon Papers regarding the war, Watergate, Iran-Contra, the Clinton-Lewinsky, all of that garbage. I'm sure people recall, when Hillary Clinton would go on TV and say, oh, this is a right-wing conspiracy, they're making it up, and in fact, she was lying, and so was the press. WMD, Obamacare, the Duke Lacrosse case where they accused those boys of raping that girl, and it never even happened. The Russia hoax, the Ukraine phone call that they tried to impeach Trump from 2019. How about the 2020 election and all the lies of all the nefarious things that were going on and the transgressions and people lying about that? Hunter Biden and the 51 security people that endorse, whatever. Yeah, you see where I'm going? Charlottesville, the suckers and losers, the FEMA hurricane lies, the bloodbath hoax. When the media saturation leads to your maturation, you will walk away. And when you do, you will seek the alternative. And in this case, the alternative is you. Me. It's us. We go onto social platforms. We go onto X. We go onto Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Truth Social, wherever you wish to get your news from. And we start looking to the people that are just like you and me. They're not elitists who think that they're entitled, like the gentleman from Axios. They're people like you and I who have reached our saturation. We've had enough. And we want reality. We want more and more reality. We don't want someone to tell us what reality is. We want to experience the reality for ourselves. We'll make changes and we'll make choices moving in one direction to another. And circling back to the very beginning of this podcast, when you watch both of those clips, go back and take another look at those, and you'll see where that saturation point comes in, that the media continue to lie and lie and lie. And the president tried to get out there and give reality, tell people, here's what it's really looking like. But the lies come from an agenda, a manipulation of a person's self-interest. What was their self-interest? Well, it looks like, from what we can observe now that it's over, is that they were trying to find ways to make, the president look like a liar when in fact he was not. And if you think back, the media, politicians, that's always been their agenda, is to make others out to be liars when in fact they are bringing the reality. And the same situation that happened to Kamala Harris in that second clip was people were lying about her abilities during the election and trying to prop her up. But when it was all said and done, everyone looks back at it and they see all of the lies. Well, the question for both of those situations, have you had enough? And we are at the end of another podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've been enjoying your Thanksgiving weekend with your family. Hit that like button if you would. Share with your family and friends. You never know how it might help them in their endeavor. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for. See you next week.